Good afternoon or good morning everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, and today is all about getting started with Capture One Express for Sony. So that's the complimentary version you get with your Sony camera, which is based on Capture One's great raw conversion engine, but with a simpler interface and less tools than Pro. So today is all about getting started as quick as possible, and then at the end of the webinar I'll just show you a few things in Pro, or the difference between Pro and Express, so you can decide whether you need to upgrade or not. If this is your first webinar and you don't know who you're listening to, my name's David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And today, as usual, we have 60 minutes to run. We might not need all of that. Probably around 45 minutes will be enough just to get you up and running on Express. You're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout. So if you look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the last section is called questions. Put a question in there that will come straight through to me. Equally, if you're on your Android device or iOS device, pop a question in there and you can ask, you'll see a question mark on the screen on the app. Tap that and you'll be able to ask a question in a similar way. I am recording the session too, so if you miss anything then you can watch it again tomorrow on YouTube. Look out for a follow-up email and that has details of our YouTube channel. Alright, so let's begin. You should be able to see not quite Capture One on screen, but Capture One startup screen. You might see the cursor highlighted like so, just to help you see where I am in the application. So after you've installed Capture One, and I'm sure you're all more than capable of figuring that out, when you start Capture One for the first time, you get these four choices. So Pro for Sony, Express for Sony, and DB, which is just for owners of our Phase 1 cameras. So Express for Sony, that's the one that is free for use for your lifetime. Pro for Sony has all the features of Capture One Pro, but it's basically a lower price point and for Sony cameras only. So as I said, we'll have a little look at Pro towards the end of the webinar. There is also, obviously, versions for Mac and PC. So obviously today I'm using a Mac, but everything that you see today is generally the same on PC. I'll point out some differences for those of you on the PC platform that you might need to look out for. Okay, 1 second and let's get started. So I'm going to choose Express, and that will open up and potentially ask you to choose a location for a new catalog. I'm just going to put it in my pictures folder like so. So you'll see then Capture One open up and immediately this little pop-up screen go up. This is our resource screen. Don't instantly just disregard that as something you think that's nagging you. If you click through these various different tabs, then they go through some tutorials or take you to the website and so on and so forth. And webinars, of course, that will also take you to our webpage where you'll be able to sign up for new ones and then also watch other webinars and so on. So don't just get rid of that. And the content is dynamic, so it does change as the weeks go by when we update everything. So just keep an eye on that screen for new tutorials, webinars and so on. Okay, let's close that down. You'll see straight away that there's a very large button in the middle of the screen which starts you off for importing images. So we're going to do that first, and then once we have some images into Capture One, we can talk a little bit more about the interface. But it's much easier to talk about the tools and various other options once we have some images into Capture One. So let's click this very large import button. In the future, you can always go to import images here as well. So let's say that, and let's just expand this out a little bit more. And really you've got two things that you need to get right in the window. The rest you can disregard. And that's where are you getting images from and where you're going to import them to. So I'm going to grab them off. I'll show you exactly where. I'm going to say choose folder and then grab these images off just my external hard drive. So I have, let's see, my name right here, and we've got a bunch of Sony images. There's a couple of JPEGs in there and some non-Sony images as well. So I'm going to open that up, and then the window here shows you the contents of that folder. If you've shot RAW and JPEG and you only want to import the RAW, for example, then good little tip to know is up in the view menu we've got some global filters. So I could hide all my JPEG files if I wanted to. If you missed it, the count just went down from 121 to 120. So there's an active filter right now. And if you wanted to hide TIFF files or PNG or RAW files or video files, you can do in the same way. So let's just grab, I won't import all 120 images. Let's just grab a set. Just pick some out like so. Let's just grab a few there. And the next part that is really important is import to. So where are your images going to go? So you've got 3 choices in this particular window. So current location, that means they're going to stay on my external drive. We're not going to move them. We're not going to copy them or anything like that. They're going to simply stay where they are. Capture One will know how to access them. If you're importing from your memory card, from your camera, then you're going to want to choose a safe location to put them. So that's why we have the choose folder option, because it doesn't really make any sense to leave them on the memory card. And then the third and final option is inside catalogue. And that's a feature which is put there really for those of you who may have come from Aperture, who are used to Aperture's way of handling images. And what inside catalogue means is that if I go to my Finder, just get a new window and pictures. This is what we created automatically on startup, the Capture One catalog. If we choose inside catalog over here, it simply means that images are going to go directly inside the catalog itself. And that's what we call a managed catalog. If we're leaving them on my external hard drive, this one here, that's what we refer to as a referenced image, because we're referencing them in their current location. Managed means that Capture One is managing them. But I'm going to just go back and say current location. Now once you've gone through import from and import to, everything else underneath is bonus stuff. So you don't really have to worry about anything else if you just want a really simple import process. The other things here to briefly mention, we can run a backup, we can rename, we can add some basic metadata, and we can apply some adjustments in the form of styles and presets. But that's some things to think about once you've got a bit more experienced. So let's say import 28 images, and away we go. That should happen relatively quickly. And you'll see an activities window pop up, which says generating previews. This is also very important depending on your system, and what that simply means is that when we look at an image in Capture One, let's just pick one at random, we're only looking at the preview data. So we don't actually have to access the raw file, which means as I browse through various different images, then we can whiz through Capture One nice and quickly. Oh, there's a good selfie of me, as you can see. But you need to optimize that to your monitor size. So if I go to Preferences and we look at Image, you'll see the first option is called Preview Image Size. Now this should be set to a pixel width that's no larger than your monitor. By default, most of you are probably going to be fine with the default, which is 2560 pixels across. If you have a 4K monitor, or a 5K iMac, for example, then you need to bump up this resolution. Because if you don't, it means your preview images are too small for your super high-res monitor, and it means Capture One is going to constantly have to access the raw files as you browse through your images. But if you have a preview size that's set correctly, it will run much, much faster. Okay, so now we've got some images in. We can have a little talk about the interface. So over on the left hand side we have all the various different tool tabs which contain all of Capture One's tools. We have the viewer in the middle, and also we have the browser, which is where your thumbnails are. Now by default, if you've never opened Capture One before, the browser actually sits on the bottom like this. But if you prefer to have it on the left or on the right or on the bottom like this, there is some basic customization that you can do. So we won't spend too much time on this at the moment, but very simple thing. If we want the browser on the right, we can do so. If you're coming from Lightroom and you prefer the tools on the right hand side, we could also place the tools on the right like so. So have a look for some basic customization options in the view menu. You'll also see that there's no modes in Capture One. So there's no library mode, there's no develop mode, there's no other modes. You can do anything at any point. So nice and speedy to move through. Good question from Ula. It says, can I use it on 2 Macs at the same time with the catalogue on Dropbox? Potentially yes, and I've certainly shared a catalogue with a colleague like that on Dropbox myself. Just be aware that you need to make sure that before you close down Capture One, for example, on either system, that Dropbox has had a chance to fully update. I have seen some situations where that hasn't gone so well, but in theory, it should work just fine. I mean, the other option is to just keep the catalog on an external drive and just move the external drive around. So you could do that as well. There's loads of different options for file management in that respect, but yes, you could do that, or you could keep your catalog on an external hard drive and simply plug it into different systems. Keep the questions coming if anything pops up as well. Also up the top, kind of different to Lightroom, if that's where you've come from, is cursor tools, which change the behavior of the cursor. And then up on the toolbar, we also have some action buttons, which turn various things on and off, like exposure warnings, for example. Let's just ruin the exposure so you can see, like so. So in red, obviously, where we're losing our highlights. You can also customize this toolbar. So just to give you a little example, if I right click and say customize, then I could drag a useful icon like the reset adjustment. So that will reset everything back to 0. And we're going to use this as we go through today as well. So tools on the left, browser on the right or below, viewer in the middle, cursor tools to change what the cursor does, and action buttons which do things like turn on and off various things, trigger an import, for example, trigger an export, for example. If you remember, we imported a few images, and your library management happens in the first tool tab, so the one that looks like a folder. This is divided up into 3 sections. So we have catalog collections at the top, user collections in the middle, and folders at the bottom. So catalog collections are fixed collections. So we can't change anything here, but it allows us to see all our images and the last 10 imports that we made. So we can always see our imports divided up by the time and date that they were imported from. User collections we'll just come back to in a second, and folders shows you the exact place of where your images are. So you can see on my hard drive Traveler that in this folder and in this folder, we've got a folder of images that contain 28 images in our catalog. If I was to make another import from another destination, it would also show up here. If you want to move images around from folder to folder, let's say I wanted to take this image, for example, and move it to a different location, like to another folder, please do that in Capture One, because then the catalog database is updated. You don't have to do any synchronization or anything like that. So drag and drop operations of moving images around you can freely do within the folders tool, and you can also move entire folders to different locations as well. And much as you do as much of those things as possible in Capture One. If I go to the Finder or Windows Explorer and start moving images around, then Capture One is going to lose the location of those images and you have to manually update. It's very simple to do. You just need to right click and say locate, locate. If you need to relocate an image, indeed you can relocate entire folders, and you can also synchronize folders if you change the contents. But as I said, if you do everything in Capture One, then you'll never have to use that functionality. User collections, that's just a simple area where we can make virtual collections. So we don't physically move any images around on our hard drive. It's just for organizational purposes. So for example, if I go to all images and say I want to make an album, I'll just call this Utah, for example, then you can simply drag and drop single images into it, or we can shift select and drag multiple images into it like so, which gives us easy collections to manage. There's a few other different options in here. So we've got smart albums, which populate themselves based on search criteria, so star rating, for example. So if I make a smart album and we use a simple preset that should only contain 5-star images, let's do that, 5-star. Then you'll see it has a little cog next to it, and if I was to choose an image and press 5 on my keyboard, you see it marks that as 5 stars. Then that automatically will show in my smart album like so. So very simple to do basic collections or more extensive collections, and then you'll see 2 more in there, which is a project and group. We won't cover those today, but projects allow you just to have combinations of albums and smart albums in a pretty clever way. Group is just a free-form organizing item like a folder in Windows Explorer or Finder that allows you to keep this area nice and tidy. So I imagine you could get a very large list of user collections, which becomes harder to manage, much easier once you organize them in groups. So if you remember that startup screen I showed you, which has a number of tutorials, then of course you can find more about those kinds of things in there as well. Michelle says, can you automatically synchronize a folder? No. So when you're using a catalog like any application, you have to tell the application what you want to have in your catalog, either via the import process that you saw earlier or via a synchronization process. There isn't really any catalog applications out there that constantly monitor folders. Now in the Pro version of Capture One, we have a different file management called Sessions, which does actually constantly monitor folders and keeps everything automatically synchronized. Again, we don't have time to chat about that today, but that's a good option if you were to shoot tethered with your camera into the software, and gives you a much more visible open structure of files and folders, which is quite different to a catalog. Again, there's lots of resources on that which you can read or watch to learn all about that. And yes, Cheryl was asking, projects keep searches limited to internal. And what Cheryl means is that if we had a project which had a number of albums and smart albums inside it, it only searches within that project. So it's a really powerful extra organizational item to learn about. But suffice to say, you are not short of organizational options in Capture One. You might have seen that I've been sort of hiding my viewer from time to time. So if you're looking for some kind of grid view in Capture One, that is it. The easiest way to do that is to say hide viewer. And as with a lot of functionality in Capture One, there's a shortcut key for everything. And you can also customize those. So for my hide viewer, I just use the key below the escape key on my keyboard, which is called a period, I think. But if you go to Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, you can pretty much define any key for anything. So if we wanted to change the view hide viewer, we would simply find it here, view show hide viewer, and just tap here and change whatever shortcut key we wanted to. If you're on a PC, you'll find that in the Edit menu. Mac, it's in the Capture One menu. But again, if there's a shortcut key that doesn't make sense to you, simply change it. That's the beauty of Capture One and its customizable interface and keyboard shortcuts as well. Moving on to adjustments, the various different adjustments tools are found in these different tool tabs, and it's kind of a left to right workflow. The first one, which looks like a queue, is indeed a queue. It's meant to be signifies quick. Sorry, lost myself there. So Q for quick. And this just has the basic sort of image adjustment things that you can do to an image if you don't want to go too in depth just yet. So let's just pick something that looks a bit flat and boring and see what we can do just with the Quick Tools tab. Base characteristics you don't need to look at. So this just automatically selects the right color profile for your camera. In this case, the Sony A7. But there's nothing you have to do here. It's all automated. The right profile is picked regardless of what Sony camera you have. White balance comes direct from the camera, so this is going to be as shot. You can pull a number of presets down here, or you can take the white balance picker and pick on a area of grey to balance the image, or of course you can adjust that as you wish just by using the sliders. So with this particular image, it's a bit flat, so let's just use our contrast slider to up the contrast, maybe brighten it a tiny bit. We can open up the shadows with shadows and highlights, like so, which does a very nice job in Capture One. And finally, in the exposure tool, we've got brightness and saturation. Brightness is just basically brighten the midtones, but with care to keep the highlights, leave the highlights alone. And saturation, if you're looking for a control similar to vibrancy, this is it in Capture One. So when we go in a positive direction, colors that have lots of saturation get less treatment than those that don't. So it just prevents the image getting oversaturated. And clarity, similar to contrast, but just affects the midtones. So it gives us a nice increase in contrast, but without blocking up our shadows or ruining our highlights. Now, if you remember, I said it was a good thing to add this reset button to the toolbar. So for example, if I reset now, that takes everything back to 0. I can undo that with the traditional Command Z or Control Z if you're on PC. So any action you can do multiple undos. But the nice thing is about this reset button is if you hold down your Alt key or Option key, as you might know it, and click and hold, that shows you a before and after. So we can easily see how it came out of camera and how it came after our adjustments just in the quick tab itself. If you want to zoom in and out, those kinds of things, there's a bunch of different ways of doing that before we move on to other tools. You can see here big head, rather small head, big head. If we tap the big head, that takes us straight to 100%. Space bar at any point will give you the pan tool, and then we can pan around nice and quickly, as you can see. So space bar will always give you the pan tool if you need it. If we double tap with the pan tool, then that will zoom out as well. Of course, you can choose the pan tool right here, or we can use keyboard shortcuts for that. So H for hand, for example, C for crop, which we'll come to in a minute. So if I go H for hand again and then double click, that will take me to 100%, and then double click, that will take me back out again. Nice little tip as well, once you're zoomed in, if you control click, then you get a little mini navigator up. So we can just move around the image freely like so. So it just saves you having to really go into too many menus and so on. There's a few other cursor tools here. We won't look at all of them today, but the one that you're probably going to want to use is crop. So C for crop. So if I press C on my keyboard, that automatically selects the crop tool. And what Lightroom users tend to get tripped up on, let's just throw a crop on this image. Once you've cropped an image in Capture One, it's cropped. You don't have to do anything else. So if you try and press enter, nothing happens. You just get a beep from the computer because that key isn't assigned to do anything. But the crop will stay showing on the image until you deviate off the crop tool. So if I now press H, then the image will snap to my cropped area like so. If I press C again, I get my crop zone back, which I can then pull out and edit the crop. Press H, back to my pan tool. So don't feel that you need to press enter after you've done a crop, not necessary. You'll see that some of the cursor tools here have a little downward facing arrow. That means you can reveal extra options. So if we go to the crop and do that, you'll see we have different aspect ratios like square, 1:3, 2:3, and the ability to add additional aspect ratios too. Same with this tool here, which is the straighten tool, can also be used for various rotation tasks as well. So have a little look through those when you have the time. Going back to the adjustment tools, each of them you'll see you have these various clickable icons at the top, and you'll see that's relatively the same in each of those tools. So if we just use the exposure tool as an example, we've got question mark, that takes you to the help site. So if I tap that, that goes you straight to the help site for that particular tool, very handy. We've got A for auto, so that will do auto adjustments based on the image data. There's a copy and apply button which we'll come back to, and there's also a reset for that particular tool. So if I tap that, then that will reset the tool. Again, Command Z, I can always undo the last action. Like the master reset up the top, remember if we option click that, that takes everything back to 0. If I option click the reset button in any tool, then it will reset back to 0 as well, as you can see. If you want to reset temporarily any slider, like let's see what our contrast is doing, I can click that, click and hold, and then that will take that slider back to 0. If I double tap on any of the sliders, then it will also reset it to 0 as well. And finally, the 3 lines, or sometimes known as a hamburger menu, would you believe? This allows you to save presets of any tool and also scroll down and view presets as well. So save and view presets in that last button. All of the tools kind of behave in a very similar way in that respect. So you'll see the same symbols. If we want to move further on from what we can do in the quick tab, then we can advance through. Actually, before we do that, let's just have a look at the details tool tab, because you'll see in here lens corrections. Now we've got a big library of all the various different Sony lenses, so you can see in this case that this was shot with the fantastic FE55. You might see different values here based on the performance of the lens. So the 55 doesn't really distort that much. It's a great lens, so we leave distortion at 0. If you've got like the cheaper 28mm lens, which has quite a lot of distortion, let's just see if there's any, if I can remember, this might be, I think these are all with the 55. Oh no, there's the 28. So you see the 28mm lens by default has 100 points of correction on it because it distorts more out of the box with no adjustments, whereas the 55, we don't feel it needs any default correction. The good news is, if it's a lens that we've yet to profile in the factory, in Capture One Labs, then there's another option called Manufacturer Profile, and that simply uses all the data in the raw file that Sony supplies to correct for any lens problems. The difference between the Phase 1, Capture One lens correction, is that there's an additional parameter called sharpness fall off. So this corrects for softness at the edges of the lens, which the manufacturer profile doesn't have. So you see that's why it gets grayed out. But the manufacturer profile still does a great job. It's not second best really, but if you can, try to use the Capture One profile. But again, that's all automatic, so if you never want to look in this tool tab, you're not going to really miss out. So let's go to the color tab, see what else we can do. Again, you'll find the same tools that we saw in the quick tool tab, like white balance and base characteristics, for example. But now the color editor is revealed, and ironically also the black and white tool. So the color editor has these 6 standard zones, which are represented down here. So as I flick through these zones, you can see which color area it is. Very simple to use. You can pick the color area that you want and then simply adjust the various different parameters like so. If you want a more precise zone, we can use the color picker. Click on the color that we want to edit, and Capture One will tell you, okay, this is the area that you want to edit. So then we can reassign these zones into something a bit more specific and then change our adjustments like so to get a better adjustment of that particular area. So don't forget that you can play around with the color editor quite easily. Incidentally, if you want a saturation control that has no vibrancy side of it, that allows you to give full control over saturation, you can choose the full color zone here, and then this adjustment of saturation will let you go as far as possible. Okay, and then as I said, ironically, there is the black and white tool, which works very nicely. You just tap that, enables black and white, and then you have the 6 color zones which you can then edit. So you see red is obviously going to affect our foreground. If I grab the blue, that's going to darken off our sky. Green, probably not a great deal. Magenta, a tiny bit, you can see in the mist. Yellow, probably also in the foreground. But you can get really nice black and whites using this tool, which is a much better option than just going ahead and desaturating everything by 100 points. Incidentally, if you want to experiment with, say, black and white looks versus color looks, or you want to just try various different looks, then you can make virtual copies. So in this case, I've made a black and white, but let's say I wanted to keep my original color. I can say clone this variant, and then you see I've got now 2 copies of this image, and let's just turn off the black and white on this one. So now I can keep a color and I can keep a black and white of the same image like so. It's not duplicating the raw file, it's just making another preview based on a different set of settings. See, it has the same name, just indicated with number 1, number 2. So if I wanted to make a 3rd variant, I could, and then add some extra curve contrast in like so. So really nice and flexible to experiment with different image edits. Chris says, is there a way to add a lens correction for third-party lenses? Well, what you can do, Chris, is that in lens corrections, if you create a generic one, and then make your adjustments, you can then save that as a preset. It won't automatically detect that preset is tied to that lens, but there's nothing to stop you then selecting all your images that were shot with that particular lens and then applying your preset, which would pop up here. So it certainly is possible, but just not fully automated. Okay, so we had a quick look at the color tab. Again, if you want to go up another level in terms of your adjustments in the exposure tool tab, again, we see some of the tools we saw in quick, but with the addition of levels and curves. So again, if you're coming from a Lightroom background and you're used to playing with the blacks and white sliders, that's exactly the same but more sophisticated here with the levels tool. So if you want to darken your blacks, you can grab the shadow point and simply move that towards the edge of the histogram, and you'll see your blacks will get blacker. Same for the whites. If we take this and move that to the right of the histogram, then our whites will get whiter. So it is actually a good idea to set your levels. If you don't understand what's going on here, easy solution, just press A for auto, and that does a great job just by setting both. And again, stepping up a level, if you want more precise control of contrast as opposed to the contrast slider, then you can use the curves tool to make precise contrast and tonal adjustments. In the next tool tab, details, again, probably never even have to explore this tool tab if you're not interested. We have different sharpening presets for each of the Sony cameras. So you might see different values here based on the camera that you're using. But what I've found personally is that Capture One defaults are actually very good for the set of Sony cameras and lenses. Same goes for noise reduction. You'll always see 50, 50, 50 here. But again, depending on your camera, then there is different noise reduction going on under the hood to get the best compromise between noise reduction and sharpness. So you'll always see 50-50 here, but what's happening to the image varies from camera and also based on ISO as well. So there's a bit more default noise reduction going on the higher up the ISO spectrum we go as well. But as I said, if this doesn't interest you or you don't want to learn how to use it, then no need to enter this tool tab. Excuse me. Clarity, which we saw in the quick tool tab, is shown here as well, and clarity just does a great job of that mid-tone contrast. Structure, not a contrast adjustment, but what it does is just add extra definition to edges and fine detail. So it's actually very applicable on a shot like this with all this fine detail, is to bump up the structure a bit, just to bring out that extra definition in the rocks and so on. It's probably hard for you to see on the excuse me, lower quality of the webinar broadcast, but have a go on your own images at home. Not so good for things like portraits unless you want to really enhance someone's facial features, but anything where there's fine detail and texture, like this is another good example. Structure does a really nice job of enhancing that as well. Last one in the details tool tab, spot removal. Let's just find a spotty, don't know if there is any spotty images here, for example. Let's just import something that I know is spotty. Let's grab this. Saw how quick that was as well, almost instantaneous import. So the spot tool has two categories, dust and spot. So dust is dust on your camera sensor, which hopefully doesn't happen too much. And spot is a physical blemish on the image itself. So a mark on someone's face or on an actual object. So in this case, I'd choose spot, grab our spot tool, and then try and make it roughly about the size of the spot. And then you can just tap away on the image and despot as you wish. And you might find that the algorithm will do a better job if you switch it between dust and spot. But general rule is dust is for dust on your sensor, spot is for blemishes on the image itself. Okay, what about a couple of workflow things? Let's just go back to all images. Oh, and you can see here, see the two recent imports. 30 images at this time and 1 image at this time, and that will show you the 10 most recent ones. So let's grab a sort of a few images in a series just to talk about copy and apply. Well, let's grab these two as they were taken pretty much one after the other. Let's do some default adjustments. So I'll just brighten this a tiny bit, have a bit more contrast, open up the shadows and have some clarity and a bit of structure, and just bring back the highlights as well. So a few simple adjustments. If we option click, you can see before and after, and we want to get the same adjustments from this image to that image. Very simple. Just press copy icon on the toolbar, select the images that you want to apply to, and then just press the apply button like so. Job done. So that copies everything from one image to another. So I'm going to reset this one once more. Let's just reset that. Command R or Control R to reset. Let's do additional thing and add a crop like so. And we're going to switch tool tabs to this one, which is our adjustments tool tab. So now when I press copy, it's going to copy everything to the adjustments clipboard. But before I apply, I want to uncheck crop because we might not want to have the same crop on all our images. So I'll select this one again. So you can shift select multiple images, or you can command or option select just individual images. And then now when I say apply up on the toolbar right here, it will apply everything except the crop like so. So this methodology is good for all adjustments or some adjustments by deselecting them in the adjustments keyboard. If you only want to do one adjustment, then we have the ability to do that in the tools themselves as well. So let's say we do want to get exactly the same crop, size and dimensions and position from this image to the other image. They're both selected. In the crop tool, you see there's a little up and down arrow, which is these two combined together. So if I click this, you'll see it says crop. And now if I say apply, then it immediately puts that to the other image. So let's just change this crop and say copy and apply, and then apply, and you see the crop changes straight away. Woo, that was rotate, so I'm going to say Command Z. Eric says, can I change the crop format? Yes. In the crop tool, just click and hold, and then you can pick a variety of different formats or add your own aspect ratio as well. if you want to make this process one click faster, hold down your shift key, click, and it's instantaneous. And this can be for any adjustment. So let's say let's mess with the saturation so we can see the difference. And I now shift click this, then you see it copies that straight away. Let's put that back, shift click this, copies it straight away. So it's a really handy little option just for doing one adjustment from one tool to multiple other images. So this one, remember, copy and apply some. Sorry, copy and apply all, copy and apply some, copy and apply one if it's just from the tool itself. How are we doing for time? Pretty good. The last thing that we want to show you before a brief look at Pro, and we won't spend any time in Pro, I'll just show you the main differences, what to expect, is that the last part of your workflow is going to be export. Very simple to do that. Let's just grab more than 3 images. Let's grab this one here, and then if I come on, select one of those that we messed with, let's grab our black and white, and let's just grab this one over here. So we've got 4 images selected. We say File, Export Images, Variants. Originals means the raw file, so that's just another way of getting raw files out of the catalogue, for example, with adjustments if you wanted to. So let's say Variants. Dialog pops up. First of all, which destination do we want to save it to? So it's just going to go to the Pictures folder, like so. Subfolder means we can manually ask Capture One to make us a folder. Could say Utah, for example, or we can use something called a token in Capture One, which will point to some aspect of the metadata of the image, which will use that to create a folder. Sounds wordy and complicated, but just to give you a very simple example, if I click here, this shows me all the tokens that you can use, which are many, but I'm going to categorize it by date and time, and I'm going to say put them in a folder, which is the current date. And I'm going to click on this small arrow and say we want year, month, day. So Capture One will make us a folder called 180111, so the 11th of January 2018. We could have it even with time and seconds and everything else as well. So let's say OK. In the Basic tab, we need to set our parameters. So let's have a JPEG. I'm going to have it full size, 100%. And in the Adjustments tab, we can do various things like ignore the crop, which is sometimes handy if you're going to Photoshop and you want as much real estate as possible. And we can also apply some additional sharpening as well. So if you've left the sharpening well alone, but perhaps we're resizing it to be smaller or larger, which means the image gets softer, then we can add additional sharpening here as well. So let's export those 4 variants. Let's say go, like so. You'll get an activity window pop up. Let's go to the Finder, to the Pictures folder, and you can see there's my folder created, and there's the images popping in like so, saved out to their full-size JPEGs. And a pop-up dialog saying export completed. Another little tip, if you want to verify in your export dialog the location you're going to, just click on that arrow and that takes you straight to that in Finder or Explorer. Let's cancel that. So that little 40-minute introduction pretty much will get you up and running to get you images into Capture One, do some basic adjustments, some general copy and apply, and also exporting out to final formats as well. Now, once you've gone through that and you've exhausted the possibilities of what's possible in Express and you want to take your adjustments to the next level, then you can have a go at Pro, which you can do for a 30-day trial, or you can upgrade for 79 euros or 79 US dollars. But if you want to try that out, there's a really critical step you have to do. You have to go to License. It's in the Capture One menu on Mac. It's in the Help menu on PC. And we need to say Change License. So stop running Capture One Express. And we've got to quit to take effect. We're going to start Capture One up once again, and what you'll see is that we come back to our original startup screen like so. And now I can say, let's have a go at Pro for Sony. You have 30 days of your trial, so let's say try. It's going to load me my same catalog, so nothing's going to change. I don't have to do anything again, but now all the Pro stuff is going to be revealed. So the first thing you'll notice is that we've got a lot more tool tabs. There's more stuff going on the toolbar itself. The first primary difference is that you can shoot tethered, so you can connect your Sony camera and shoot directly into Capture One, which is great if you work in the studio. If we look in the color tool tab, there's a couple of additional tools that have popped up. The first one is the color balance tool. Let's just open up one image. This is a really nice tool which is specifically for color grading, so I can kick the colors of the shadows, midtones and highlights just by using these grading wheels. So if you come from a video editing background, this is a real nice additional dimension you can add to your images. The color editor itself has an advanced tab which allows you to make much more precise adjustments. So if you have a situation where you really want to narrow down a precise color selection, so let's just grab something off this sign up here. So if I choose that and say view selected color range, then you see everything goes to monochrome, which is not part of that range. And if I want to, I can then squeeze down this selection even more. Actually, we can enlarge this tool and we can make very sort of specific selections. Let's just pop you back. Whoops, where'd you go, color editor? I lost my color editor, hang on. Color editor, fully customizable workspace as well. So then you can make very precise selections. As you see now, I've only really got that part selected. And once I'm happy with that, it allows me to play around with the brightness, as you can see, saturation, and so on. And you can have up to 30 different picks, where you're restricted to 6 in the basic tab and much less range of adjustment. The real big thing between Express and Pro, in my opinion, is the ability to use layers. So we can work specifically on various parts of the image with up to 16 different layers. So again, very similar to Photoshop, but working on the raw file. So if I want to do specific adjustments, so let's grab this one. Let's say we want to have a gradient mask and just throw that on the image like so. So there's my mask, and then just lighten up my foreground a little bit, then we can do so very easily. And this gives me options for dodging and burning, for example, local exposure changes, local sharpening, local noise reduction, and each layer also has an opacity slider, so we can vary the amount that we are going to do. So for example, if I make a new field layer, then I can apply my color grading. If we go to the color balance tool, just make sure my layers are up, and then I can color grade on this particular layer, but then vary my opacity for additional effect as well. So it opens up tons of options working with layers. If you find that inspiring, just go back a couple of 2 or 3 weeks in the webinar archive and you'll find a whole webinar purely on working with layers. And we've literally just scratched the surface with what I've shown you here. For exposure changes, we've also got a more extensive levels tool where we can dig into the channels separately. In the curve, we have a luminosity curve, which basically is a curve that only affects contrast. So if we just grab an image which has some kind of heavy color in it, like the blue sky, whoops, and we adjust that, then when we use an RGB curve, saturation always goes up. Let's make a new variant of this one. If I use a luma curve, then it keeps my colors nice and stable. So if I flip back and forth between these two, you see with the RGB curve, the blue has jumped up in saturation. With the luma curve, the contrast has gone up, but saturation has stayed the same. And finally, there's a bunch of options for processing. So instead of having to go into an export dialog, you define recipes. JPEGs, TIFFs and so on, and then you can run multiple recipes at the same time and have more options for automatically sorting those into different folders and so on. Loads of different stuff. But remember, you can trial that for 30 days. You can always go back to Express if you want to, but you're certainly free to trial that for 30 or so days. Remember, Capture One normally costs $299 or 299 euros. The Sony version, which is all the same features as Pro, but just for Sony cameras, is only $79. So it's a huge bonus and a real nice advantage for using a Sony camera, that's for sure. Okay, last question from Brenda. Can you upload TIFF or DNG files from older cameras? Yes, Capture One can work on TIFF. It can work on DNG. Hopefully for DNG, that the DNG files you have, if you embedded the original RAW file, you'll get a better result from Capture One. If it's a native DNG file from the camera, then it will look absolutely fine in Capture One. But yes, you can work with your DNG files as well. Hopefully that's inspired you a little bit, and if you want to know more, we saw briefly a bit about color. So next webinar, month 18, that will be January the 18th, is going to be working with color. So that's next week, and that will give us plenty of time to dig in all the various different color tools and so on and so forth. If you look out for an email tomorrow, roughly around this time, that will have details of upcoming webinars and where you can find this recording as well. It'll be on our YouTube channel, but there'll be a link in there which will take you straight there so you don't have to hunt around for it. Okay, many thanks for your time today. I hope that's useful with you starting up with Capture One for Sony. Certainly give it a go. You've got nothing to lose and lots to gain with the quality of your outputs. Take care and see you all soon. Thank you.